And where?
Yeah, I'm in Colombia, Medellin, Colombia, Latin America.
Is it what time zone is that?
So we're in Central Time Zone right now.
Oh, okay.
Generally we're on East Coast time for half the year, but we don't celebrate daylight savings. So when daylight savings switches over, we're in Central Time Zone.
Okay.
But yeah, man, dude, welcome officially to episode number 1 of the Waking Warrior podcast.
Thank you.
Yeah, my intention is we had talked and connected a little bit last week. And my intention was I want to start exposing some stories of veterans that have been in service and transitioned out of service, and whatever challenges they found in their life or how they overcame it, and start exposing some of these amazing healing methodologies and methods that we can use to let veterans know that they're not alone. So thanks for coming on, man.
Yes, sir. Glad to be here.
Yeah, I'd love for you to tell people a little bit about yourself. And like, you spent what, 26 years in the Air Force?
26
yeah, just
years.
Give us some of your background. Let's start off there.
Yeah. So 26 years. I originally joined for 6 years because I wanted to go in, get my education, and then get out. And 26 years later, they ended up kicking me out. You know, I hit my high year tenure as a senior master sergeant E8. Missed chief by under a point, less than a point. So I was really close, but I knew it was time anyway. So it was God's perfect timing for me to get out. And I thought I was set up. You know, I retired in 2013, and I had used every bit of the tuition assistance when I was in. So tuition assistance and a part of my GI Bill too. So when I got out, I mean, I had 2 master's degree, a bachelor's, and several community college of the Air Force degrees. So, you know, I thought I was really set up, and it was tough. It was a struggle, you know, when I was still on terminal leave and I was putting out resumes, following everything in TAP, and wasn't getting any callbacks, wasn't getting any interviews, wasn't getting any hits or nothing. And I was like, man, what is going on? Because I guess I was just really confident that, hey, this is no big deal. I'm going to get out of the Air Force and roll right into the civilian world and take it by storm, you know, and kind of got smacked down pretty quick because that just wasn't happening. And then finally I got a call from the VA. I had applied for a labor relations, employee relations, HR job there. And I got interviewed for that, offered the job, and I took it. So basically, once that happened, like a day or two later, I got another call from a local hospital here that they had a leadership job. It was basically head of their leadership training division. And they said they wanted to interview for me for that. And, you know, my integrity character was like, you know what? I just accepted a job at the VA. I'm sorry. You know, sorry, it's just not going to work out. Bad timing. So wasn't really regretting it because I was pretty happy and pretty excited about the VA. So I started there, and about a month after at the VA, they called me back, the local hospital, and said, hey, you know, we haven't gotten anybody. We really just love your resume. We really love how you're set up, and we think that you would be a really good fit. And I'm like, you know, sorry, I've been here a month now, and, you know, I'm getting used to this. And I think the excitement of working at the VA was still there. A new job, civilian job, you know, got to wear clothes, real clothes, besides my military uniform, which was a challenge for me, actually. That was.
I feel that.
Yeah. I mean, you know, for 26 years, I knew exactly what I was going to wear because they told me. And now it's like, holy crap, I get to choose what I get to wear, you know, and so, yeah, I mean, setting aside clothes every night, and that was kind of a hassle. Had to buy a whole new wardrobe, but I was kind of getting used to it. So I turned them down again and said, hey, you know, sorry, I've been here a month, and I'm just not going to quit. I'm just not like that. I'm more, you know, I guess the integrity first part of the Air Force core values was just, I mean, the VA called, they gave me an opportunity, and I was like, I'm going to give it my all, which I did. And about 3 months, 4 months into it, I realized that the VA job was not for me because I was doing all labor relations. The employee relations side or the training and development, just I never did. There was no time for that because all I did was labor relations, which was all disciplinary work. And man, I hated it, Scotty. Every day it was just letter of reprimands, letter of admonishments, letter of counselings, letter of suspensions, and that was my entire job. So everything that we did as supervisors in the Air Force, writing these own letters and of counseling and, reprimands. Now I had to do it for supervisors in the VA. And I'm like, why aren't they writing their own letters, to their people? And they're like, no, there's so much legal stuff involved. So I was kind of like a paralegal in a way too, because I had to dive deep into regulations and, every letter had to have in accordance with such and such regulation and policy. And so that was part of the reason why labor relations did all the paperwork. But it was just frustrating because a lot of it had to do with, there was one time that I sat down and talked to a supervisor and, they had a pile of work or, disciplinary actions against this one person. And I'm like, well, tell me a little bit about this person. What do they do good? And they're like, well, they don't do anything good. And I'm like, come on, they got to do something well. Do they answer the phone politely? Do they say hello? Do they say good morning? And he's like, well, that's not part of their job. And I'm like, I'm not worried. What do they do that's good? And this supervisor could not see anything that was good in their person, their employee. And that just rubbed me the wrong way. And so I started really questioning this supervisor. And I'm like, well, tell me a little bit about this person. What do they do when they're not working? Are they married? Do they have kids? What are they interested in when they're not working? Well, that's none of my business. I can't ask that. And I'm like, what do you mean you can't ask that? You're working together. They're spending more time with you Monday through Friday, waking hours, than they are with their own family. And you don't even know if they even have a family. And so I ended up telling this guy, I was like, you know what? I don't blame this person because I wouldn't want to work for you either. And that got me talked to because this supervisor went to my boss and said, hey, Paul Grau said that he wouldn't want to work for me because he expects me to know all this about my people. And I was like, that's just common leadership to me. That's just, as a leader, that I believe that is your job, to get to know your people and because your people don't give a rat's butt about you if they don't know how you care. If they know, I think John Maxwell saying is something about people don't care about how much you know until they know about how much you care. And once they know that, man, I mean, it's that whole people first concept versus task first. And I work a lot with the DISC assessment, and I know the D's and the C's are all task related first, people second, and the I's and the S's are all people first, task second. But you have to have that mixture, and you have to realize that the Air Force mentality was kind of like, I was a DC when I was in the Air Force, and my mentality was, hey, if the Air Force wanted you to have a family, we would have issued it to you. That was the old saying. And, but, in the civilian world, I saw a lot of that at the VA. And so about by my 3 or 4, 5 month mark, I told my wife, I said, man, I hate this job. It's just nothing but disciplinary work. There's no helpful work. They weren't telling the people, they were telling them what they were doing wrong, but they weren't really correcting it. They just thought that you hand them the disciplinary work and they're going to be corrected on their own. And that's not always the case, because sometimes people may not know how to correct themselves, and they may not know what's expected of them. So my wife told me, she's like, you know what? I understand you're frustrated. Give it a year. You're still adjusting to this whole transition. Give it a year. And I'm like, okay. So I gave it a year, and at my 52-week mark, I put in my 2 weeks notice. The day that I got a raise from a GS9 to an 11, and my boss simply said, "Hey, you got a raise today, you know, and is there any way that I could talk you into staying?" I'm like, no, sorry. And she's like, "Okay." And by that time, I actually got along well with the union, and because I told them, I said, "Hey, our number one concern is taking care of the veteran," and that's when I really started seeing how much the veteran really meant to me, I think. But I got out of the VA and I started a coaching business, my own leadership coaching, because at the VA I saw how much leadership was almost extinct. I mean, there was still some good leaders, but man, in my military career, I had some great leaders. And I think you can contest that. In the military, we're trained about leadership from day one. You talk teamwork in basic, and then right out of basic, I mean, you're trained to do your job and to get that responsibility, and to if somebody's not there to lead, well, you step up and you lead. And in the civilian world, we just didn't have that. So after I had my business for a while, I was getting clients, but not enough to really call it my job. I mean, I was getting enough to take care of all the conferences I was going to and the certifications I was going through. So I was making some money, but my retirement pay combined with disability, that's really what I'm living on. And I started realizing, I think I got some PTSD going on, and my PTSD was ironically not from any deployment or anything like that. It was,
Really?
I was stationed in Oklahoma City when the Murrah building blew up. I was stationed at Tinker Air Force Base. And the next morning, I lived right off base. So I was like, I got to base early because there was a line miles long to get in, because they were searching like every vehicle with dogs and mirrors, and so it took forever to get through the gate. But I was lucky enough to get there quick, and I was one of the first ones. And somebody came around saying, "Hey, they're looking for volunteers to go down to the Murrah building, with cleanup and search and rescue." And I'm like, "Yeah, I'll go." So I went down to the gym where they were all kind of assembling. They gave us a quick briefing, loaded us on buses, and I got down to the Murrah building. It was just before 9 o'clock, so it was less than 24 hours after the bomb had gone off, and they were still in full, search and rescue at that time. So for about the first hour, we walked up and down the street and just looking for, different pieces of evidence, and we had cans of red spray paint that we would circle if we found anything that wasn't already circled. About a block down the road, the axle off of the back of that truck was like implanted into this minivan. Like it was like halfway, the minivan, it was just smashed halfway back through. And, and then about an hour later, me and 3 other Air Force people hooked up with a team of 12 Tulsa firemen, and the 16 of us were a team, and we went in and we started digging through the rubble by hand, because apparently they were removing it with machines, and they were afraid that they might tear into, bodies or survivors with the backhoes and the stuff. So we formed bucket brigade, and just one piece of concrete at a time, filling buckets and sending it down. And we started digging a lot around the daycare center, and we didn't find any survivors, but we did find a lot of body parts and whatnot. And I think I told you this last week. It was that, looking back at my 26 years, that was my best day in the Air Force and my worst day. It was my best day because I felt like that was the one day in my 26-year career that I really, truly served fellow Americans. I mean, right here on our soil. And man, I wouldn't have, looking back, I would have done it in a second. It was the worst because obvious, the body parts we found and stuff like that. And man, we dug from like noon until about 2:30 in the morning. And every time we found a body part, we would have to go down, and the people in their white suits would come and bag it and tag it and then send it over to the church that was set up like a morgue there. And then we'd go back, start digging again. But so we had a little bit of breaks between there, but our adrenaline was going. I mean, we would have worked all through the night. We were not tired. And finally, they're like, "Hey, you guys have been digging you guys have been working since like noon. We need to replace you guys. You've done your part. Thank you." And it wasn't until I was on the bus out of there. And if you've ever been through Oklahoma City, they got this one building at Christmas time that puts a big cross on one of the skyscrapers. And that cross, it's only lit up Christmas time, and that was lit up that night. And man, I'm getting chills talking about it because I was on that bus, and I remember looking out that bus window and seeing that cross. And man, tears just started flowing down my face, and thinking about all the stuff. And I was just like, man, I was thinking about all the family members that lost people, and it was just people that went to work that day, babies, toddlers, just playing with toys, and so I got to process this.
No worries, take your time.
Yeah, sorry.
It's all right. It's what we're here to do, man. I'm really grateful that you're sharing this story with me. So
it's the first time I've gotten this detailed in this in a long time since I actually went through counseling, and that's what I'm kind of going to get to next. And so 4 years after I retired, I was in the business, and my wife talked to me a little bit about, maybe you need counseling or something, because she said I was different from that day on. She said she could detect different things in me. I could never sit with my back to a door. Now I can. I'm kind of, I forget what the counselor said. She said I'm desensitized to it now. But I picked up the phone, called my doctor, and it was about 20 years after the Murrah building. And I told the doctor, I said, "Hey, I think I would like through TRICARE, he put in the reference, and I started seeing this counselor. Actually, I didn't get referred through TRICARE. It was all TRICARE did, but the copay was like, I don't know, $30 a visit or something. So I started with 2 times a week, and then I went down to once a week, and then I went down to once every other week, because even though TRICARE was covering that, the $30 copay, twice a week, 4 times a month, or no, 8 times a month.
Adds up.
Yeah, it adds up pretty quick.
And this was 20 years after. So
yeah.
Do you remember what things was your wife seeing in you, and what ways were your behavior modified that was getting, I guess, worse over that 20 years?
Yeah, probably. I would say the one thing would be that she said I was very easy to anger, easily angered, triggered very easily. I mean, I would just go off on, and I'm still seeing a VA counselor, a therapist for it now, and it's through the VA, so it's all covered now, and that's it's great. I'm seeing a good guy. I had an appointment today with him, and it's amazing now. And if I'd known that back then, I would have sought it out at the VA. But she said I was easily triggered, and that was kind of worrying her. So the anger, easily triggered, just going off for no reason. Road rage. Oh man, I never got out to the point where some of these videos you see, but I mean, somebody get in front of me and or cut me off or do something wrong, and I'd be screaming at this person with my wife and kids in the car, and she's like, man, something's got to give here, you know? She's like, what is going on? So, and plus I couldn't concentrate. I couldn't really focus on the business all the time. I would do it a little bit, but I was really scattered. I would get, you know, I'd be doing one thing, I'd be focused, and all of a sudden something would pop up, and I'd start doing this, and I'd start doing this. I mean, and I'm still like that when it comes to books. I mean, you can see a lot of books behind me. There's books stacked on my desk here because I'll read a little bit of a book and then I'll get bored with it and I'll start reading another one. And then I'll pick up an old one and say, yeah, where did I leave off on this? And I'll have to review, and then but it's, she just said that, you know, mainly just the shortness in my temper was the big thing, and the lack of focus. So from there, let's see, so it was 3 to 4 years after I retired, about 20 years from Murrah Building. And I started seeing this counselor, and man, she used a method called, oh man, now I can't think. It's where I had these little buzzers in my hand.
It's like EMDR or something like that.
Yes, EMDR. That was it. So that, he said, you know, I've done this, and this has had success with other PTSD patients, and I think, you know, maybe this would be good. So I would start holding that, and I mean, man, at the time I thought she was the meanest person on earth, because the part of that EMDR is she would walk me into that building, and she would get me. She's like, okay, tell me what's next. You know, what's going on? What do you see around you? And I'd be holding these paddles, and, you know, it's supposed to spark both sides of the brain, I guess. And she said you could do it just by tapping on your legs too, if you're sitting down, and that kind of triggers or it gets both sides of your brain clicking. But anyway, she would walk me in there, and then at the end of that, before I opened my eyes, she would always say, okay, I want you to picture your treasure chest, or you got a chest over there, open it up, put all these memories in there, close it up, put the lock on it, close it away. And I would do that, and I'd wake up, or I'd open my eyes, and there was so many days when, man, I'd be crying, telling her the stories, and I could hear her sniffing and in the background, because I mean, it's when I was telling her and being so graphic, I mean, she was asking me, what does it feel like? What do you smell? And I could describe it, you know, and I'm sure if you've ever been in any kind of situation like that, if you could be back in that moment in a split second, you could smell it. I mean, I could literally be standing on that rubble, looking up at the clear blue sky and smelling this smoky stench of death. There's no other way to describe it, but man, I could feel the concrete, you know, but now that's when I took that moment earlier. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath. That's what I did. I imagined opening that treasure chest, putting all those things in there, closing it up, and locking it. And through that, and I saw her for probably a year and a half. And my dad had died in between that too, so that was rough. But an hour and a half of counseling, and then she's like, hey, you know what? I got to the point where I was like, I think I'm feeling pretty good. And she's like, yeah, you did real well. And she said, I'll never forget about it, but I'm more desensitized to it. And when I just explained it earlier, that was just, I used to give keynotes. I was a keynote speaker, and I would tell stories about it, and I wouldn't get into real big details, but I would get caught up And, of course, a lot of the audience would be too. And I would talk about that. But now I can talk about it without losing my crap, I guess. Just taking a little time to think about it. And so I stopped seeing her, and I went a couple of years without seeing anybody. And my wife and I, we've been married 28 years, and she has seen the absolute worst in me. I think that's true for everybody. Your family sees the worst, the best, and the worst of you. But it's not right on her. And so we started seeing, actually, the same counselor that I had. We called her up, and we're like, "Hey, do you do marriage counseling?" And we just want some tips, kind of like, when you go in for a fine tune-up, and we don't have a lot of problems, but come to find out, after talking to her, we did have a lot of problems. And so that was, we walked through that, and it got a little bit better. There was times when it got really good, but it's still up and down. And that's why I called the VA to seek out help there. And I noticed the big trigger to go back to the VA was my memory. I'm 59, but my memory sometimes is shot. My wife will tell me something, and we'll have a discussion, and the next day I'll remember just little bits and pieces of that. And I'm like, man, what is up with that? She's like, "You don't remember that?" And I'm like, "No." So she would give me a little, I don't know, just a little clue, or I said, "Well, tell me what we were talking about." And she'd start talking, and I'm like, "No, I don't." And then she'd say something. I'd be like, "Oh yeah, I remember that. Okay, now I vaguely remember." But I was just tuned out. And that's where I saw a psychiatrist at the VA. He put me on some meds to kind of help me with focus. But the memory thing, they sent me to a neurologist, and the neurologist put me through one of these long, it was like a 7-hour test, where, you ever see that movie Independence Day, where they're,
Yeah.
Was it Independence Day, or no, the one with Bruce Willis, when they drill on the moon?
Armageddon?
Yeah,
Was it
Armageddon. Yeah. So you remember where all those guys, those roughnecks, they're going through all these things, and that's kind of like the thing that they put me through, right? So it was I had to, do all this and say all these things and count backwards and forwards, and it was crazy. And then there was a couple fill in the bubble things that took probably 2 hours. Well, at the end of it, I was like, "Well, that was, I kind of enjoyed that." And they're like, "You enjoyed that?" I was like, "Yeah, it was it was fun." And the technician was like, "Most people don't say they enjoyed that, but I said, "Yeah, it was okay." Well, the neurologist or the technician said, "Well, the neurologist will follow back up with you probably in, a few weeks, maybe a month." And it's getting to be, I think it was after Thanksgiving. So they said, with the holidays coming up, it might not be till the first of the year. Well, the very next week, I get a call from the neurologist, and I'm like, "Oh, this can't be good." When the doctor calls you that quick, and she's like, "Yeah, I just want to go over these with you, and can you get in here, like tomorrow or something?" And I'm like, "Oh man," I said, "Is this really bad?" She's like, "No, we'll talk about it when you're here, but it's not real bad. I want to, start getting you treatment on this, or start, addressing some of this stuff." And I'm like, "Oh boy." So I go in to see her, and she gave me the results. She said there wasn't anything wrong with my memory. And I was like, "Really?" And she's like, "Yeah." She's like, "Your memory is actually pretty sharp." She said, "However, it does reveal, clinical levels of depression and anxiety." And I'm like, depression? I said, and that kind of shocked me because I knew the anxiety part. I knew I had that, but the whole depression part and being labeled somebody with clinical depression and anxiety, man, that was like, I kind of took a step back and said, well, man, I'm not depressed. What's up with that? Well, and she explained it, and she's like, it seems like you've responded well to the one-on-one therapy. So she's like, I'm going to recommend that, and she said, I would recommend a weekly one-on-one therapist session with you, until you start feeling better and everything. And I was like, yeah, okay. And she's like, well, when you go to a doctor, especially mental health, they always say to answer these things. And do you ever have any feelings of suicide and all this other stuff? And,
Yep.
So the doctor was like, and I'm just being honest with you. She was very open, and I was like, all right, because honesty is the key. And I'm like, you know what? I lied on that form. And she's like, you lied on it? I'm like, yeah, when it asked if I ever have thoughts of suicide, I said, I do every once in a while. I said, it's nothing really serious, but every once in a while I'm like, man, maybe the world would be better off without me, or maybe my wife and family would be better off without me. And she's like, have you ever acted on that or anything? I was like, no. I said, I've never, that's been about it. And she's like, well, what stops you from, I said, well, I instantly think about my wife and my kids and think about, man, what would it be for them? What would it be like for them if I did that? And I wouldn't want to put them through that pain. And I was like, I heard a long time ago, I think it was a pastor or something, they said that suicide is like one of the most selfish things that you can do because, you're gone, but you leave everybody else behind with just a tremendous burden. And, a lot of people, like wives and kids, and they may be thinking, man, why didn't he just talk to me? How could he do this? How could he or she leave me behind? And, they never thought about what it would do to me. So I always think of that, and I'm like, yeah, I would never, I could honestly say I would never, knock on wood, carry out any kind of suicidal thoughts or anything like that. And it was strange because I was not expecting what the doctor told me. She said, Paul, everybody has those thoughts. She said, including me. She said, every once in a while, you have those thoughts. You might have a really bad day, or you might really fail at something, or, somebody, social media, somebody, you might get a troll or a hater or something. She's like, she's like, it's the thing that you're self-medicating and you're working through that. And she said, that's the healthy part of the mental health. And I'm like, oh, okay. So ever since then, I never exaggerate in the least bit if I get any kind of doctor's form, especially in mental health. And I think that's important because I think over my life, I have. And especially in the military, because in the military, I had a top secret clearance for the most of my career. And I always heard, hey, if you ever go to mental health, you're going to ruin your career, or you're going to lose your clearance, and then your career is shot because aircraft maintainer, if you can't have a top secret clearance, you can't work on any of the aircraft. And so I never thought of anything. And if I ever had any kind of, the annual checkup that we went through, I wouldn't say I lied. I would just say I would stretch the truth a little bit. All right. I wouldn't share my deepest feelings. Does that make sense?
Yeah. No, it totally does. I think that's one of the things that really affects veterans in general, because like you've just said, in most cases, I believe still in the Army, it's a negative mark if you're admitting that you're struggling with something, or if you're depressed or anxious, and especially when it comes to holding secret and top secret clearances. So I guess that's a question that I wanted to ask, right? So with that, like if you can't go and seek help, from your community, your family, the Army, right? Did that carry with you into the civilian world? Did you experience resistance in terms of accepting that you might need help or going to and asking for help?
Yeah, I believe so. And I think it carried through until I picked up the phone. And I wish I knew the breaking point. I think the breaking point was my wife and I, our relationship was just becoming very unhealthy. And I was to the point where, you know what, I need help and I cannot do this alone. And, my wife has always been somebody that I could vent on, which I mean, was just amazing. But I got to the point where I just think I said, I need help.
Mm.
And, you see all these stats about 22 veteran suicides a day on average. And that just kills me, Scotty. I mean, I'm like,
Yeah.
there's no way I'm going to become one of them 22. And I think at that point, there might have been a point where I was like, man, maybe if I don't get help, maybe I will be one of those 22. And so I think that's when I really said, you know what, it's okay. And I was I'll tell you what, another thing, I was a part of a mastermind group. And are you familiar with masterminds?
I am. Yeah.
Okay. So I was a part of this big mastermind group, and it was called Iron Sharpens Iron, ISI. And I'll tell you, there was like 150 guys in the group, but we were broken down into groups of 10. And the group that I was in, I mean, they became like brothers to me. And there was one or two that may have served, but we could really open up with each other, and we could tell each
It
other.
sounds like a men's group.
Yeah.
It sounds very much like a men's group.
It exactly was. And, it's funny because 4 of these other guys and myself are still meeting every Thursday morning, 6 a.m. We call it our Bible mastermind. All right. Because, it was originally formed to go through a Bible study, but now it's like we're working through Matthew now, but every once in a while we'll just, like last week, one of the guys was going through a really tough time. So all we did was focus on him, let him talk, and we just poured into him, because 5 minds are better than 1 type of thing. And it was powerful. And, I'm in a group now. It's a pay group. I pay $50 a month for this one group, but it's Christian Coaches Academy, and it's amazing. We have a call every week. And I think that's where one of the biggest transition challenges that we have coming out of the military is that camaraderie and that brother and sisterhood that we instantly lose, and
Community.
Yeah, that community, because even though I live, 15 minutes away from an air base here in Little Rock, I mean, I'm like, you're not going there every day. And then when you do go, you're like, so much changes in a matter of a week or two, so much. And so you go back after a month or 6 months and it's like, oh my gosh, what's going on? This place just kept moving on without me, and it's that feeling almost of you don't know where you belong. And I think getting in groups like that belonging, and that's kind of how we met. Because I think I shared my YouTube channel with you on LinkedIn, and
Yep.
You wrote back and said, hey, yeah, we need to get together. And, and that's why I started my YouTube channel, because I've been a leadership coach. I'm still a leadership coach, but I consider myself more of a leadership life coach, because leadership is all about at work and off work. You're a leader no matter where you are. And it's all about having that balance. And a lot of people argue that we can't have balance and there is no such thing as balance. And I kind of disagree with a point, but I agree to a point and I disagree. I think we can have balance, and it all comes down to boundaries. We need to set up boundaries, like me as an entrepreneur now, I work from home. This is my home office. And, I start work 9, 10 in the morning because our kids homeschool and we get them up and around and going. And then usually
I was homeschooled too.
You were? Cool.
Yeah, I never went to public school. My first out of public experience was West Point, basically.
Wow,
it was
that's
a
cool.
bit of a sharp transition.
Yeah, we've homeschooled all our kids, and the oldest one is now just got accepted into med school. So,
congratulations.
Yeah, thanks. And so it's so we but at 5 o'clock is when I want to stop, but at a certain time during the day. But if I'm on a roll at 5 o'clock, it's nothing for me to work right through 5 o'clock and it be 6 o'clock or 6:30, and it's like, oh my gosh, it's getting late, So I want those boundaries where the time hits 4:30, 5 o'clock, I'm shutting everything down. I'm leaving my computer right here and I'm walking up to the house. And I think that's where that balance comes in, and that's one of the things that my therapist and I talked about today is getting through or coming up with some kind of enjoyable transition from work time to playtime. And he says that. Go ahead.
Is it more like cognitive behavioral therapy that you're going through now?
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. Yep. CBT. So I so we worked on that whole, what am I going to do to, because if I'm doing something I'm enjoying every day, when I quit, that's going to actually make me want to quit, and have that boundary and set up that clear boundary, consistent boundary every day that I'm saying, okay, it's 4:30. I'd like to knock off at 4:30, I think, because, and he even said, he's like, yeah, that's 8 to 4:30 is a normal work day. I was like, dude, I never started 8:30.
Yeah, we definitely don't get trained that way in the military.
I know,
wanted just
right?
to go back to the community piece. So when you started finding like the Iron Sharpens Iron group, your men's group, your study groups, when was this? Was this after therapy, or was this during the 20 years before?
I think it was. I think I joined up with ISI probably 6 months after I started therapy with the one therapist that I was paying the copay.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So basically, you knew you had a problem. You were finally ready to start working on, not a problem, but a challenge to work through life. And you started working on it, and then you started reaching out to community. So I guess, is this where you put the piece of the community and how important that was in place? Did you know about that before, or like what was the 20 years like? Were you completely separated from the rest of your community once you got out?
I know my neighbors, but the rest of the community, not very well. I did get involved in the Chamber of Commerce here. I got involved with the Rotary shortly after I retired, so I got to know a lot of local people, and that was definitely helpful. We were really involved with our church, so that was great. I was really involved with the men's ministry in particular at my church. My wife was involved with the youth ministry, so our kids were therefore really involved with youth. And and they didn't have a choice in the matter. We brainwashed them early, I guess. But it was.
I love that you found it.
What's that?
I love that you found community. I remember that was the one thing that stuck out from our previous conversation. You said, out of sight, out of mind. It's amazing how important community is and how quickly it goes away when we get out.
Yeah, that is so true. And that's where, as a leadership life coach, I really I've been having this pull to really help veterans for quite a while, and I've been fighting it off because I don't know if it's a pride thing or just the fact that I'm like, I had some bad memories the last couple of years of my military career. I was doing well, but I had a couple of bosses that were very um, how would you call it? Psychologically harassing. All right. They were very, and that's the yelling, the screaming, the belittling, the putting down, you piece of crap, I mean, and here I was a senior and I was catching it from bosses and I was trying to be the filter because I didn't want it trickling down. So I was trying to absorb as much as possible. And man,
that's some good leadership right there.
Well,
The
it took a toll on me. It took a toll on me though, too, I'll tell you. And I think that's when I really realized you need somebody else always. And I would talk to my wife. I was like an additional duty first sergeant at the time, and some other first sergeants, we would talk. The first sergeants group was amazing. That was an amazing community because, I mean, a first sergeant, who can you talk to in the squadron? You're held with a lot of responsibility and a lot of, what are the confidentiality stuff, and you can't just go and talk to anybody about that. But you can talk to other first sergeants about it without mentioning names. And we used to always say, man, if we could write a book on this stuff, it'd be a bestseller for sure, because you can't make up the stuff that you see and hear about as a first sergeant. But that was a really good community. And I think the more senior you get in rank in the military, the less that those opportunities come along, it seems, because then everybody's busy. You reach out to one of your peers and they're busy. They're busy taking care of their people. And, man, I'm taking care of my own people. I can't take care of you. And the last thing that I would want to do is go to mental health. And I probably should have, I probably should have. And, hindsight 2020, I should have turned in that supervisor. But then again, you have that stigma. Yeah, you turn somebody in, you're going to be the whistleblower. They're going to have that, they're going to get back. That retaliation is going to be there. And so I knew I was getting close to retirement, and I think I was just coward. I was a coward, and I didn't want to do that. And I wasn't the only one that felt this way about a couple of individuals. But man, looking back, I thought that I could absorb a lot of it. And I think my peers did as well. But there was still stuff trickling through us, getting down to the lower ranks. And that's why I said I knew it was time. I did not want to be a chief because that person I'm talking about was a chief. And I'm like, if that's what happens when you become a chief, and that was just a lie that I was telling myself, because I know a lot of good chiefs out there. We used to have a saying in the Air Force: are you an E9 or are you a chief? And there's a lot of people that sew on that stripe, and they're just an E9. They're not a true chief who really wants to take care of their people. But in aircraft maintenance, I mean, we had to be hard on our people, but it still doesn't mean that we had to treat them a certain way.
Yeah, so I guess there's definitely a way the military has to operate, and I guess with the bulk of the work that I'm trying to do is how do we help the veterans that are transitioning. This is also a lot of your work with your transition out of the military podcast, which, by the way, I'd still love to be on.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
Just let me know.
We're gonna hook it up.
Yeah, I think what advice would you tell a transitioning service member or somebody that's out been out for a while, in terms of maybe it being okay for them to seek help and that they're not alone? Because there seem to be some sort of barriers that we have to get through, right? This mentality that, if I tell anybody or admit I have a problem, this is going to threaten my entire career. Or if I talk about how my anger issues or memory issues are surfacing, like there's some great resistance to that. What advice would you give to people that are suffering maybe anxiety, depression, suicidal thoughts, in terms of getting help?
The ones that are transitioning?
Yeah, transitioning or out,
Okay, I would tell them go go to the VA, like today. Seek out the VA, and if you don't have a VA hospital close to you, there are satellite offices everywhere. So just get a hold of the closest VA to you and tell them that you would like to make an appointment to see a therapist or a mental health counselor. I don't know what the actual steps are. I know for me, I made an appointment, and I made an appointment with the VA through mental health, and then they got me in to see the neurologist, and then the neurologist recommended the other, and then I started seeing the therapist. But the VA is awesome because, let's face it, once you're transitioned out, you're out. Your military career is behind you. You got nothing to worry about now. And the more that you try to shoulder that burden now that you're out, it's never, ever going to go away on its own.
It might actually get worse. And then people, you're in your support network, like in this case, your wife, sounds like she shouldered, thankfully and lovingly, a lot of the burden for you as you were going through that healing process. Like, my hat's off to her.
Good point, because she is actually seeing a therapist as well. And a lot of that is because she shouldered a lot of that burden that I was telling her. And, I never mentioned names to her. Well, there's a couple names probably I mentioned, but for the most part, but yeah, she shouldered a lot of the burden on that. And that's where the whole, you mentioned the YouTube military to civilian transition. That's where I want that community to be, where I want to make videos where transitioning military veterans, they can go there and they can see, hey, Paul went through this too. I hope that they can relate to me a little bit, and that I'm somebody that they could get to know and trust, and go look at these videos and say, man, that's exactly how I'm feeling, and it's okay for me to go get help. Because the biggest piece of advice that I think anyone can get is, man, we weren't meant and we weren't created to be islands. We were created to be in community. And
I would also lightly and lovingly disagree with you on one point, and I think that suicidal thoughts are not normal.
Yeah.
That should not be going on. Yeah. Not saying that isn't part of the body's healing process, but I think that if we're healthy and happy and fulfilled, we don't ever think about ending our life.
That's true. And that's a really good point, because depending on where you're, if thinking back, I mean, I haven't had those thoughts in a long time, even the least bit. But thinking back, I think back, okay, why did I have those? And you're right, I wasn't healthy at that point.
It's a signal. It's like a symptom of something that's happening. My personal view of the world is that these things like anxiety, depression, PTSD, they're not root causes. They're symptoms that arise from something else that happened to us that we're struggling to deal with or not dealing with. So it's exactly like what you're trying to do with your podcast is exactly what I'm trying to do with this. Like, my hope is, let's have 1,000 of these conversations. And then someone comes to one of us and says, hey, like, I was in the Air Force for 26 years and I've been challenged with anxiety and memory problems. You know what? I got a podcast you should see, brother.
Yeah.
And then maybe we save that person somewhere in between the 0 to 20 years that it took you to actually say, look, I do actually need help. I think if we shorten that time frame to where, hey, it's okay to ask for help, because everybody's struggling. It's normal to struggle with things. It's normal to have challenges, and this is a good thing, and going to help is a good thing. If we can start to change that mentality, I think we're going to be doing some good.
One thing that you mentioned, that first big community that I was involved in, that first big mastermind, the ISI, they had one of the retreats that they met up twice in person a year. And one of these meetups, they had a counselor come in. That was the guy who ran it, Aaron Walker. It was his personal counselor. And this guy was an older guy, and he started talking about all the problems that men in particular at that time go through. And he's like, the thing is, you're not alone. He's like, what you're thinking about, just about every other guy out there that is married with kids is either thinking about or has thought about this, and you are not alone, and it's okay to reach out and talk to somebody. And he said, that's what I love doing. I love talking to men about this, where I mean, it is so healing and medicinal just to talk about things. I mean,
Yes.
Because you feel so weighted down, and when you start sharing that, it's like, oh my gosh, where did that sandbag go? And it's,
Yep.
and when somebody's there to listen, and I mean, that's what I love about our mastermind groups that I'm in now is, we don't pay anything for this Bible mastermind that we're in, and we don't miss it. Our guys just don't miss it. The 6 or the 5 of us show up every week, and there's some mornings I don't want to get out of bed at 5:30 in the morning. I'll guarantee it, but we get out and we show up for each other because we know that they're counting on us, and that's their time. They may be hurting for something, and I might be able to help them. And that's where,
I love that, yeah.
And I love your heart where you were saying, you're setting up these strategy sessions and whatnot.
Yeah, a lot of the work that I've focused on the last 3 or 4 years outside of ancestral healing. So I'm down here in Colombia, and I've been really focused on plant medicines, psychedelics like ayahuasca and other traditional plant medicines used in ceremony. But the majority of my work has been focused around men's groups, with this idea that men in society in general don't just forget the military part. We're not encouraged to take off our armor and really share with other people what's going on in our lives. It's like it's very difficult for us to be vulnerable, to have real conversations, and to ask for help when we need it. And so that's what the last few years for me have been on, is being a part of those and helping those men's groups, because it's so needed. And then you put on the military on top of that, right? It doesn't make a very good soldier if you have to sit down and talk about what's on your mind and heart every 5 miles during a ruck march. But when you get out, it's a totally different mindset, right?
Yeah. Oh man, you know what? I love what you just said. We're not programmed to take off that armor and just shed our guts to other people, and that's it takes a while. I mean, even as a coach, coaching leaders, the first 2 sessions sometimes is just building that relationship with my client, because until I build that relationship, I'm not going to be able to peel any of their onion back to figure out what's going on. A lot of the leaders that I coach are very dominant, very very structured, and if their companies send them my way, a lot of times it's just to kind of get filed down a little bit. They need to hone their skills. They need to build their people skills and stuff like that. And I'm not going to be able to build anybody's people skills if I just right off the bat, okay, hey Scotty, how you doing? So tell me what's going on with your team. I mean, no,
yeah, it's very surface level.
Yeah,
you really got to get deep.
Yep. And once we get to that deep level, and I love where he said surface level, because that's where 99% of our relationships are, right here, surface level, or maybe a little less than 99%, but it's those relationships that go beneath the skin and go deep. They're the ones that I've heard it called 3 a.m. friends. That's the 3 a.m. friends that you can call at 3 a.m. and say, hey, I need you to go pick me up some Pepto-Bismol at the store or whatever. So yeah, it's that getting deep and taking off our armor. I love that.
Yeah, that's I hope to have more of these conversations and show people that that's not a bad thing. Brene Brown actually writes a lot about this. Are you familiar with Brene Brown?
Oh yeah, vulnerability. Yeah. She's right.
Yeah,
right there.
Oh, nice. Yeah, her books. Yeah, I don't have my bookshelf behind me. It's in the other room, but
yeah,
I really love her as an author. And it's this idea like that for me, true strength isn't about being brittle and kind of armored up. It's about being flexible and vulnerable. More like bamboo, deep roots, flexible, wind's not going to break it. And I really hope that over time, that through all these healing modalities that we're working with, whether veterans need therapy or men's groups or psychedelic retreats or diet changes or Bible studies. It doesn't matter what it is. Like, I just want people to find healing and experiment for themselves to find what that means. I'm curious about your faith. You mentioned your faith a couple of times. How is that, or has that affected your healing process as you've been going through it?
Yeah. So a part of what I'm doing on this YouTube channel is, and I believe that when we get out, our identity is really grounded in the military. And when we transition out and we lose that large part of our identity that we've been carrying for so long, it's a shock to the system. So when I started really breaking down and discovering my true identity, an identity in the simplest forms is how you see yourself, right? I mean, who do you think you are? And how do you define yourself? And I define myself first and foremost as a child of God, and I was created by God to do amazing things. And I know that it's going to be good no matter what I do. If I pray about it, that faith of knowing that God's got me, and that is my biggest identity. And my purpose is to glorify God in all that I do. So my identity is also a father, a husband, a podcaster, a YouTuber, an interviewee here with Scotty Schneider. It's all these different identities. And now instead of being a senior master sergeant or active duty Air Force, now it's a veteran. And I think we really have to grasp a hold of that veteran status, because that veteran status is very honorable. And I think when we...
And at least once a year is worth a meal at Applebee's, I hear.
There you go. But I mean, I live in a very veteran-friendly community, and I mean, I always usually forget to ask for military discounts, but you can usually get military discounts wherever you ask for them. And but that whole identity of my faith, I believe, Jesus is my Lord and Savior, and that is my true identity, and it's grounded right there. So that's where I'm building my foundational identity. It's all built on that. I think Jesus talks about Peter building it on a rock, that you need that solid foundation. And I don't think if I didn't have that solid foundation, for me personally, it would be very difficult to have navigated all this other stuff. And to realize that, hey, it's okay. It's okay. We're not perfect. I mean, and as a Christ follower, I am far from being perfect, and I think too many Christians might think they're perfect, but I'm not. We're all sinners. And by going to other people and seeking help through other people and using their gifts, I think therapists have a true gift of being a therapist. And, my wife is a very good therapist due to the experiences probably that she's heard over the years. As a first sergeant, I became a teacher and a coach and a counselor. That's one of my master's degrees, is counseling. So but you can get a degree and still not be your gift. And I think if you get with the right therapist, counselor, you're going to know that this is not just a job for them. This is a gift. Yeah. It's a passion. And that's where my heart is now, to find those veterans their calling, find their best fit, find their passion, and get them in a job like that. And man, can you imagine? They say over 70% of the world are working in jobs that they hate.
I believe it.
70%.
Actually, I had this today. I was on a call with my team, and somebody was like, "Hey, happy hump day." I was like, "Happy hump day." And I remember back in the military when we would say that, right? It's this concept of like, you're over the hump of the week, like you're surviving the week. Yes. And I just thought, like, how blessed am I where I don't dread my weeks? Like, there's virtually no difference in between my enjoyment of the week versus weekend. I just love what I do. Yeah. I I share your passion. You're just getting out of the military, right? I think something like the average is most veterans move to 2.5 jobs before they find something that actually fits them. You
Yeah.
know, so is that where, like, could we send people your way to your podcast? Is that what you kind of focus on?
My podcast focus it's called Run to Your Leadership Challenges. And I'm slowly kind of putting more and more transition info on there. So like the last couple of days, I think I talked about 5 ways that you're giving your best, and 3 biggest challenges of transitioning out of the military. But realistically, it could apply to anybody transitioning, but I'm really just focusing on transitioning out of the military, and
Love it.
and I think one thing that a lot of us forget about, and you probably don't, but I think we talked about this the other day, but not only the military member, but their families also transition.
Correct. It's supporting the support system.
Yes, absolutely. And when you start talking about what you're doing, I can see your passion. It's like you see that, your eyes light up, and I love that. I love seeing that in people. Love it.
I'm really glad to have gotten the chance to where you could share your story, and I want to appreciate and say thanks for the vulnerable way in which you did it, because I think it's only through examples like this that people are going to wake up and say, you know what, okay, yeah, Paul did it, Scotty did it, I can do it, I can ask for help. Amazing, brother. Well, I think that's probably a good anything else you want to add, or do you want to tell people where to find you, where they can get in touch with you, etc.?
Yeah, I can do that. So people, they can contact me through my email is paul@clcteam.com, or my podcast is Run to Your Leadership Challenges, and the YouTube channel is Military to Civilian Transition.
Amazing. I'll make sure that I include those wherever we put this podcast. Certainly the YouTube channel for sure. Yeah. I really appreciate it, Paul.
You can put my phone number on there too. I'll give you that. That's 501.
Yeah, you did. I don't know how big this podcast is going to get, man. You may deeply regret this later.
I don't. You ever hear Bob Goff? You ever hear Bob Goff?
No.
Well, he has several, New York Times bestsellers, and his personal phone number is in the back. And he said, whoever calls it, he will return that call. Might not be right away, but if he's not doing anything, you call, he picks up. And I've proven that right. So pretty cool. But
brother, I appreciate you a lot, man. Thank you for the call. Thank you for your vulnerability. Thank you for your example. And I'm looking forward to seeing how both our podcasts and the things that we're trying to do for veterans improve in the future, man.
Yes, sir. Hey, I'm going to set up my Calendly, and I'll send you a Calendly link of when we could jump on a Zoom as well.
Yeah, I'd love that. Let's set it up. I'm going to go next week. Next weekend, I'm leaving for the jungle to go take with the indigenous tribes some more ayahuasca, swinging back and forth in a hammock, fighting off mosquitoes.
Really? Wow.
And, delving into my own healing journey as well.
Dang,
I'm very excited. Cool. So I'll be out of communication for like 2 weeks, as will Chewy.
Okay.
He's coming along with me.
Chewy?
Chewy will hopefully not be eaten by an anaconda.
They got them down there?
Oh yeah. Oh yes. We sing songs to the anaconda. They're
no, I'm out. Yeah, I'm out of there.
We're right on the Amazon and between the border of Colombia and Ecuador. So
oh my goodness!
Really looking forward to it.
Wow, that's going to be cool. I'd like to hear more about these psychedelic retreats that you do.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd be happy to share.
Have you heard much about that? Because I guess the VA does it now. Is that mushroom medicinal kind of cleaning the slate and wiping the memories or the bad stuff? Have you heard anything about that?
Well, I have worked with and I'm very familiar with mushrooms and their medicinal use, psilocybin mushrooms specifically. I've used them a lot for my own healing journey. I'm glad the VA is finally waking up. Legislation is finally changing in the US towards the traditional, like plants, marijuana included.
Yeah.
mushrooms, ayahuasca, these sort of substances have been used for millennia to really help heal people. So it doesn't like wipe your memories, but kind of like what you went through with EMDR. One way that mushrooms can help you would be rapidly reframing that experience that you went through. So helping you see that experience from different lenses, different perspectives, and with a lot of love. And so one of the things that the medicinal plants do is really show you different perspectives of things. Now, that said, you have to implement stuff in your own life. You know, that's the integration that we call it. You have to really actually change your life after you do it. Otherwise, it's just you're taking the medicinal substance and then not doing anything with it. So,
right.
Yeah, I would love to dig into that at your leisure on your podcast, man. That's what I've spent the last decade really pursuing.
Okay. Yeah, and when we do the Zoom, what I can do is I can break it up into chunks, because my podcast, I try to keep it, well, it used to be under 5. Now I'm between 5 and 10 minutes. And there's a couple that go like 15.
A really quick one. That's a really quick one.
But what I'll do is, like, say if we talk for an hour, I can break that up into 4 or 5 different episodes, and I'll put like a beginning and an end on there. And so I can definitely do that, and I can break it up into specific topics that we talk about. So yeah, it'll be good.
Awesome, brother.
I enjoy that. So
please pass my best to your wife. Thank you so much for appearing on the very first podcast of Waking Warrior. Woo!
Yes, cool.
Very excited.
And I'll have to send me the link. And do you have a YouTube channel as well?
I will be putting one up eventually. This one's going to be recorded. I'll share it first, I think, on LinkedIn. And then once I have probably 10 or 15 episodes in the hopper where I can consistently put them on YouTube, then my YouTube channel will be formed.
Cool. Thanks, Scotty. Hey, I appreciate you, man. Appreciate everything you're doing for vets.
Likewise, brother.
All right. We'll see you. Have a good treat.
Man. You too.